Throughout his time in the Beatles, George Harrison often found it difficult to assert himself creatively alongside the dominating presence of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Although he was an accomplished songwriter in his own right, George frequently had to settle for a limited role, and the frustrations he felt during and after his time with the band eventually inspired him to write a song born of resentment. A native of Wavertree, George had written several tracks featured on the Beatles' earlier albums, having been permitted only a fixed number of contributions per release. But things began to shift when the group stopped touring in 1966 and shifted their focus entirely to studio experimentation. During the making of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and the White Album, George's frustration grew as he found himself creatively sidelined. Tensions within the band peaked in January 1969 during the early sessions of what would later become their final album, Let It Be. Feeling alienated and unhappy with the band dynamics, George abruptly walked out, leaving behind a curt four-word farewell. The uneasy atmosphere during the Let It Be sessions was rooted in unresolved conflicts that had surfaced months earlier during the chaotic recording of the White Album. During that period, Ringo Starr temporarily quit the band while working on Back in the USSR, an incident that seemed to affect George as well. These tensions followed the group's visit to India, a trip strongly influenced by George's deepening interest in Indian philosophy and spirituality. The retreat was meant to be a peaceful escape, but it ended on a sour note due to growing disillusionment with their spiritual guide, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Ringo and Paul returned to the UK earlier than expected, eager to dive into new ventures at their Apple Corps label. John and George also cut their visit short after hearing troubling allegations involving the Maharishi and a female follower. While John returned to England, George stayed behind to seek guidance from another mentor in Chennai. This trip to India, combined with the emergence of Apple Corps as a business, marked the beginning of deeper divisions within the group, rifts that ultimately remained unresolved by the time of their breakup in 1970. Amid these growing tensions, George wrote Not Guilty, a track that conveyed his feelings of being underappreciated by Lennon and McCartney. It echoed the same emotional undercurrent found in his earlier song, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. When George came back from India, he was full of new musical ideas, but his output was largely overlooked in favor of material from John and Paul. Much of this creative backlog would eventually find a home on his acclaimed 1970 solo album, All Things Must Pass. Not Guilty in particular included lines that many believed were directed at John, Paul, and even the Apple enterprise itself. The lyrics touched on George's perceived interference with their plans and his desire to simply carve out his own space, without trying to overshadow anyone or claim undue credit. He even referenced being unfairly accused while just trying to contribute, and made pointed remarks about being misunderstood or undervalued. During 1968, the band spent hours at Abbey Road Studios working on the song, reportedly recording over 100 takes with George on lead vocals. However, the track was ultimately dropped from the White Album, likely due to lingering dissatisfaction and the intensifying conflict within the group. Music critic Simon Lang suggested the lyrics were too openly critical of the band's internal issues, which may have led to its exclusion. Journalist McCall Gilmore also believed the song was left off because it was clearly aimed at Lennon and McCartney, and the band recognized it as such. Though Not Guilty didn't appear on a Beatles album, George revisited and refined the song in 1978, eventually including it on his 1979 self-titled solo release. Reflecting on the track, George explained that he had originally written it in 1968 after returning from their spiritual retreat in Rishikesh. At the time, it was meant for the White Album, but the recording didn't quite come together. Years later, he rediscovered a forgotten demo from the 60s and decided to revive it. He admitted that some of the lyrics had aged, with references to disrupting Apple's progress and pushing back against the group dynamic. But, at its core, the song was a reflection of his attempt to find space and make his voice heard within the band.